What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Now, on today's episode, I've got on the founder of the website The Gist and author of a brand new book about everybody's favorite topic, which is Brexit. Josh Hamilton, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, man. We're living in weird times, very weird times right now. I think as everybody knows, as every listener of mine certainly knows. But yeah, doing as best as I can be despite the nonsense. Despite the nonsense, things are actually going very well for me in general. But yeah, I would quite like the world to return to normal and everyone to become sane again. So how about yourself?
Yeah, that would be really nice. If you figure out how to do that, please give me a call.
Yeah, it's a
But you
bit of a
managed to be
tricky one.
doing like a really good job of like staying sane amongst all this madness. Like your tweet last night was quite just reminding that there are still some sane people out there was quite, I wouldn't say
It resonated.
inspirational, but yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely did.
Yeah, it's resonating with people all over the world. It's also gone viral on Facebook as well, which is really interesting because so there's obviously a lot of people out there feeling like they're the only sane person out there. But yeah, Josh, I've done a really brief intro there, but why don't you tell the people a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
So I'm from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and so I'm here to talk about my book, Brexit: The Establishment Civil War, which is essentially I like to look at it as a case study of how social media is in the process of destroying our democracy.
Mm.
I think Brexit was a really great example of not only how social media can be used to circumvent democracy in order to stir up tensions and in order to inflame divisions that already exist. And I found myself writing a very short book about it, and then it kind of ended up spiraling into a very long book about Brexit and the whole saga, but from like the causes of it that involve like 40 years of underfunding and of neoliberalism, I think, and like draw themselves out the whole way to the modern day where I think the thing that people miss, and the thing that I really like want to emphasize is that we are not like living in a society full of crazy, either woke liberals, like extreme crazy Remainers, or like mad racist Brexiteers. Is like we're all just like people trying to get along in this world, and I feel that social media has been used, or is at least it presents the world in a way that everyone seems insane and
Mm.
everyone is completely mad, and the most hard line crazy people are the loudest, and it makes you feel like maybe you're losing your mind, and it,
Hmm.
it it only leads to like polarize the country more and more and more. And I basically wanted to address the I think social media needs to be watched and regulated in order to prevent this getting worse and worse and worse.
Interesting. Okay, there's a lot to get into there. So, first of all, what made you want to write a book about this topic? What inspired that?
Well, the start of the book wasn't even about social media. The reason I started like doing my research into it was because I had written an article that went, I wouldn't say viral, but it got a lot more views than I would usually get on things, about how I believed that Brexit was potentially going to be used for wealthy businesses and people to evade the new tax harmonization rules that were coming in the EU. And when that blew up, I kind of got this sense that perhaps Brexit might be used in order to further advance the kind of like far. I don't really even want to say far right, but the extreme laissez-faire economics that is pushed by a certain portion of the Conservative Party and a lot of the think tanks that exist within Britain.
Hmm.
And it kind of just evolved out into this like look at how social media was used to like as a catalyst to I wouldn't even say hijack the Brexit vote, but I definitely think it had a serious impact in the toxicity of the debate. And you could, I think, make a very strong case that the 1 billion ad impressions that the Leave campaign paid for, with a set of adverts that were, should we say, less than truthful, and completely unregulated with no oversight whatsoever. And they were allowed to just put this out. And it's given us a situation where the very wealthiest in society are going to try and use Brexit, in my opinion, to bring in more privatization, to cut taxes, and to turn Britain into what the people who campaign for it have openly described as a Singapore on the Thames. And I am incredibly concerned that we haven't learned any lessons whatsoever. And that this pattern will continue to repeat itself, where the population gets played off against one another by using the polarizing nature of social media to the benefit of the wealthiest and most powerful in our society.
That's an interesting angle, because wouldn't it be fair? Is it not accurate to say that actually the Brexit vote was more popular amongst working class voters? So what's the thinking behind that?
Essentially, I believe that there was two sides to the Brexit campaign. There's what the politicians and the wealthy donors want to happen, and there's what the people want. And what the people want is in my view not going to happen. Like what the people wanted was, so take the phrase "take back control," for example. And I talked with Ed Straw about this on my own podcast. And I believe that it was an incredibly powerful piece of marketing and branding, because it appealed to people who feel like perhaps their place in the world is slipping, like the modern world is running away from them. They watch jobs disappear from coastal towns, and where factories and just working class jobs would have been what was there for 40, 50 years. And then it's been slowly taken away by the slow creep of globalization. And I believe the Brexit vote was a cry for desperation, was a cry for help, like a desperate cry from those people saying, hey, listen to us. We feel like we have no control of our lives anymore. At least a portion of the vote. There was obviously people who voted for different reasons. But that's the reason I think that the slogan "Take Back Control" was so powerful, because it speaks to an idea that I think we can all we can all tap into at least a little bit in the modern world, that things are so out of our control and they're happening on such a global scale that is so beyond what's happening in our day-to-day lives, and people just want a little bit of stability. And they you can point to the immigration argument, but I feel that was just part and parcel of feeling like the way the world has been taken away. And it's the same kind of sentiment that Donald Trump tapped into. And I think it's a similar sentiment that a lot of right-wing parties are successfully tapping into across the whole of Europe as well. I think it's a sentiment that is born out of legitimate concerns and then labeled as racism or hatred of the other, or Europhobia, or desire for control of the borders, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I feel like
it's a good thing.
Yeah, what the people want is not what the politicians want. What the politicians want is, in my view, a fourth wave of neoliberalism in Britain, which will involve cuts to public services, privatization and sale of state assets, and ultimately a cutting of red tape that involves the working time directive, that involves environmental regulations, that involve all of the things that a lot of liberals and left-wingers think is great about the EU. And that will be probably stripped away, and we're seeing it now already. Parts of there was the GP practice that was sold off to an American consortium that is has 500,000 patients on it. There's talk of big finance being the big thing for Britain to stabilize its economy, or become the global Britain that we want it to be. And there's evidence that it's happening already. And I think that COVID's probably going to accelerate that as well. But ultimately, I see very little connection between what the people voted for, or what they at least thought they were voting for, and what the politicians and the donors actually want.
That's interesting. I mean, I feel like that's politics in general. I hear that. I don't feel like it's unique to Brexit. And even with Brexit, I think it could be said for both sides, right? I think that there's an equal, certainly at least an equal, I'd say probably more politicians who opposed it, who are on the Remain side, who also have their own, motives and ideas behind it, which involve finances and certain links with the EU and trade, etc. I'm not an expert to go into all the detail of it. And also there's a lot of, rich people, champagne liberals who are generally on the side of Remain, who also have their own sort of personal agenda there. I mean, I feel like on both sides, I think one thing with Brexit, I'm not super passionate either side. I mean, I'm someone who's kind of like ideologically Leave, but actually voted for Remain. Although if there were another referendum, I would have voted Leave, the second one. But I feel like all people, I think this is a big problem I think we're having in society, especially when it comes to politics, is this is both in the UK and abroad, and certainly in the USA, is I think people taking very multifaceted issues and problems and then trying to narrow them down to like a single variant, right? Just make it one thing. So it very quickly became Brexit was just about racism or xenophobia or disliking brown people or immigrants or whatever. And there was this whole narrative of like, oh, I remember after it happened and people were running around saying, I can't believe we've got like dozens of millions of racist people in the UK who voted for this horrible racist Leave thing. And I'm there just like, gosh, man, like, how are you people this disconnected from the world? But then I think you did also have people on the, the Leave side, especially the sort of very staunch Brexiteers who also have like a very simplified view of what the Remainers or, the so-called Remoners are about. And like you said, I think we can get into this with social media. I think you see these sort of quite extreme voices amplified. So you do get like the psychotic Remainers all over Twitter with the FBPE and their bio and the European flag. And anytime I've interacted with these people, I'm just like, y'all are crazy. I voted Remain myself, but I would much rather hang out with Leave voters than y'all. And then you kind of got like the super hardcore Brexiteer side as well. And it's a lot of mudslinging back and forth, and it doesn't seem like people are really, there's not a lot of empathy going on of people just trying to understand this. And even amongst some people I know personally who are generally pretty reasonable, they themselves were just like, oh, I can't believe people voted Leave. Like, it's because they hate immigrants. And I'm kind of like, come on, guys. Like, are we pretending? Like, there are lots of good reasons to vote either way. And also, my position on Brexit is we don't know. I don't think it's not going to be another, I'd literally say at least 10 years before you'll be able to look back on 2016 and decide whether or not that was a good decision, because these things really take a while to play out. As it stands right now, I think for most people, haven't really noticed much of a difference, right? It hasn't been the doomsday of prices going up double and people getting attacked on the streets because there's this rise in xenophobia. Like, I remember all the scaremongering that was going on, and it was like, okay, like that didn't happen. Like, nothing's, as far as I'm concerned, nothing's happened. The passports turned from maroon to black, but that's about it. But
I just got my driver's license renewed.
Oh, did you?
So there's no EU flag on it anymore.
Interesting.
It looks counterfeit. That's the funniest thing about it. Like, I looked at it and I was like, it looks fake.
I guess you get used to seeing things looking a certain way, and then when it changes, there's something in your brain that's like, there's something off there. There's something missing.
Yeah, but no, you're 100% right about the what I said being true on the left as well, or on the Remain side even. And that's partially why I called the book The Establishment Civil War, because it's not about it's not about what the people want. It's the wealthy people who stand to benefit from Brexit versus the wealthy people who are benefiting from being in the EU. And that for me is where the fight was. It wasn't people discussing like genuinely saying, hey, look, maybe there is a level of immigration that is too high. Maybe that's well, okay, there's definitely a level of immigration that is too high, but there was no discussion of, where that level is. There was it just became this thing where, if you believed in Brexit, which I am not sure where I would vote a second time. I voted Remain the first time, but I'm a little more having done a lot of research for the book, I find
Yeah.
my opinion changing. And my best friend who voted for Brexit was like, so it took you 5 years and writing a book, but you finally agree with me. But it's definitely that thing that people said about Trump voters is like, not all Brexiteers are racist, but all racists are Brexiteers.
That's not even true, though. Even that's not true. Not in the slightest. Like, I
You
have
think so?
not even close. Yeah. Like,
Okay.
I think so by miles. And this is based on, I mean, I'm connected to hundreds of thousands of people. And I know that is nonsense, right? Just like the Trump thing, right? When people say, oh, not all Trump voters are racist, but all racists are Trump voters. I'm like, no, that is so far off. Like, people just repeat that and they parrot it because they don't actually interact with so many of these people. And I'm just like, that's so far off. The amount of racism I've experienced primarily is not coming from the side that people who believe that would think it's coming from. It's coming from the left side of the aisle. It's coming from Remain voters if they're in the UK. In America, it's coming from the left side of the aisle. It's not coming from the Trump people. So maybe some of that depends on your own ideology, right? I'm someone who's very openly is more right-leaning in general. So maybe that's a factor. So perhaps someone who's looks like myself, who's more left-leaning, may find, oh, okay, they're getting more attacked by sort of, people with bad ideas on the right side of the aisle. Whereas with me, it's kind of inverted. But even before I was open about my politics, man, like, I'll be real, like, throughout my life, I've experienced more racism from the left side of the aisle than the right. Yes.
Like, what form did that
by a
take?
long, by a serious margin too. It's not even like 55-45. I'm talking 80-20, 90-10. And I'm going back to my teenage years here in terms of when I actually know the person's sort of political leanings here. It's a different kind of racism sometimes, but I think there's sort of like this gigantic blind spot on the left and liberal side of like the amount of racism that actually does exist there, certainly in comparison to the other end. Yeah.
What kind of form? Sorry to start asking you questions, but
Yeah,
like,
go
what
ahead.
kind of form does that take in your experience? Is that like
Wow.
the racism of like low expectations?
That's a big
Or
one. That's a big one. It's also, hey, you're a minority, so you have to be on our side. You're supposed to agree with us, right? If you're black and if you're a black American and you're conservative leaning, you catch hell. Like, I don't know how aware of this you are, like, because in America, 90% of the black population votes Democrat. So if you're one of those 10 who is, who is voting Republican, then you're going to get called all kinds of awful names, often by people who share your skin color, but even by those who do not. So there's this expectation that you have to have a certain ideology, and if you don't follow it, it's open season on you. Then there's also the whole idea of just minorities sort of being owned by the left wing, whether you're a woman, you're a black person, you're a brown person. I've heard the same from even people who are gay, LGBT, whatever. It's just expected that they're liberal, right? It's like it's almost like we own you, right? In labor, you had Jeremy Corbyn come out and saying, the only way black and vote labor so that we can unlock the potential of black and ethnic minority people. I'm like, what kind of, right? I'm like, what on earth is that? Or you had Joe Biden saying, if you need to decide whether you're going to vote for me or Trump, you ain't black, right? And he said that, the black community, he was talking about the Latino community, and he said, unlike the black American community, the Latino community is very diverse, and they have all sorts of different ideas. So he's not very subtly just saying like black people are a monolith. So there's all that, and then the bigotry of low expectations, the wanting to set the standard differently for people who are minorities or people who are black, acting like, even all these concepts like white privilege and this whole like oppression victim narrative. Like, I hate all of that stuff, man. Like, I despise all of it. I've hated it since I was a teenager. Since I was even younger, I'm like, yo, like, we can compete on a fair level. We don't need all these new things. So there's that whole sort of, you've probably heard the term like white savior complex. There's that whole thing that exists very, very much on the left side of the aisle. And I think sometimes it sort of is supposed to be coming from a good place, but there's a lot of people on that side of the aisle who use especially when you're talking like the woke type, right? Like, those people are freaking racist. Like, there's a lot of really racist people in the woke movement, and they use it to sort of hide. They sort of hide it. They hide under it. But as soon as you scratch beneath the surface, yeah, you see the reality. So that's my own personal experience. So when it comes to those things, whether it's like Brexit, Trump, whatever, I'm like, people repeat those things and I'm just like, no, no, no. Like I don't buy it for 1 second.
Wow, I've really stuck my foot in my mouth there, haven't I?
It's okay, man. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. But look, it's good. It's good to know, to see things from different sides, because I think it's a blind spot. I think it's a major blind spot. I think everyone, including people who are more right leaning, people who are conservatives, whatever, everyone knows that, like, everyone knows what right wing racism looks like, shall we say. Everyone knows what that looks like. Right. But I think like left wing racism, despite being, honestly, in 2021, I would say it's more prevalent, but people don't really know what it looks like. I've even heard people say that racism itself is a right wing thing. And I'm just like, good grief. Like, we do not live in the same reality. If you can't acknowledge that this exists on both sides of the aisle, then you're just not paying attention here.
Well, that actually, it brings me nicely to something I talked about in my book. Clearly, I've been stuck at least somewhat in my little echo chamber, and that's something that I got really worried about when I started reading or researching for my book. It was that we so easily get stuck in our little bubble of like who we hear, and like humans are literally like the worst things in the world for trying to change our mind. Because as soon as we've heard something, regardless of how much you hear it's not true afterwards, because you heard it first, that's what you believe. So imagine like how hard it is to like change someone's opinion if for like 2 weeks even all they're seeing is just like, for example, let's pick something not controversial. So vaccine passports are good, right? If that's all you've heard for 2 weeks, and then someone comes along and says, hey, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe that's like a very, very, very slippery slope towards government tyranny. They'll go, oh, you're just a COVID denier. And like their brain just switches. And like, I'm clearly, like, obviously I'm not perfect. I'm probably guilty of this myself in many respects. But it happens to us all, and the social media is only making this phenomenon worse. And my real fear right now is to pick another easy topic, is the amount of people being banned from different platforms like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Like YouTube have banned Stephen Crowder.
Have they banned him now?
I don't know how permanent it is, but they have like suspended his account. Then he posted a video. He posted a video trying to explain what was going on a different like account, and they removed that as well. So he's like suspended from posting for a while, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, which is like 5 point. He's got like over 5 million subscribers. He's got
a huge channel. Yeah,
I really got to wonder what's going to happen to YouTube, to be honest. But we can get into that later. But my point is that with people getting removed who have any opinion outside of the mainstream narrative at the minute, it's going to create like I've already been concerned about echo chambers like forming on social media. It seems like the entire goal here is to turn social media into one giant echo chamber for like the correct opinion, and that's going to be even more damaging, because if you think people are bad at listening to other opinions when they have access to it on the same floor, like where do you see how bad it gets when like two sides of an argument exist on totally different platforms? Like there'd be no crossover whatsoever except to like parody the other side. It's going to get real fun.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about social media. So, I mean, I have lots of ideas on this as someone who's a very, very active social media user. But what do you think are some of the big problems with social media and how it's affected the political and social cultural discourse?
Essentially, I think it amplifies all of the problems that we have. I mean, so like to use the examples I use in my book, like the Brexit vote, and I talk quite a lot about the Trump election as well in 2016, and I think the reason that companies like Cambridge Analytica, who I also talk about, were so successful in using their strategy of micro-targeting ads to people based on their personality in order to like stir up tensions, to get people more riled up based on things that make them angry or frustrated, or they make people want to react. and or they get them real passionate about freedom or America or whatever the topic is. I think the reason that tactic was so well utilized in both Britain and America is because the underlying like social divides were already there, and they were the most obvious, or the most that we were the most divided nations in the developed world who could be exploited in this way, I think. So you saw like the divisions based on like say race in America, or in Britain we've got like the class divide that we talk about, or you've just got the divide in both Britain and America that David Goodhart talks about in his book The Road to Somewhere, which is stunning. If anyone wants to understand how like our country is divided at the minute, like read that book.
Okay.
So he basically suggests that Britain and America can be split into three categories: somewheres, anywheres, and in-betweeners. So the somewheres are about 50%, the anywheres are about 25%, and the in-betweeners are 25%. Now he also states that like you can't put anyone in one specific category, but it's a really great broad way of looking at it. So the somewheres tend to be people who grow up, they will like live in the town that they've grown up in, or near the village, or near to the city, and they'll stay there, and they build their life there. They don't necessarily go off to university. They will stay. They feel they belong somewhere. And the anywheres tend to be people who are, they leave home at 18, they go to a new city, or potentially even a new country, and they get exposed to all these people who are coming from every different background across the country, across the world, and they get exposed to fantastic new ideas. Like I'm not saying these are bad, either of it's a bad thing. They've both got their merits. But the point that he's making is that this experience, especially with so many people going to university, is creating like a new divide in both Britain and America between people who feel comfortable in the modern world and people who don't.
Okay.
People who like the free, open borders, let's live anywhere sort of ideology of the modern left, versus people who sort of yearn for that stability of, say, the idealized version of the 70s. When everything was rose tinted and perfect. You had your one job for one family, and people could just come out of school, get an apprenticeship, get a job. It was simpler. And that I believe he has really identified the divide there. And I think that's most prevalent in Britain and America, across the world. And I think that social media has amplified those divisions, both accidentally and by people attempting to use it, whether that's the campaigners who are paying for ads that tend to like play on those divides, or whether it's Russian bots and trolls coming straight out of the Internet Research Agency, and who were like deliberately stoking those divides, more so in America than Britain, but they were attempting. How successful you think they were is up for debate, but they were attempting to use social media to exploit those divides, to weaken or just cause trouble and cause fires to explode and to divide the nation. And obviously, they've done an awful job, because we're more united than ever. But yeah, so that's why I think social media is problematic. It just tends to it tends to amplify whatever is there, and the divisions that exist in our society and our politics are not going away unless we deal with them. And we're not going to deal with them unless we have a serious conversation about it. And I don't have any faith in the politicians, Keir Starmer, the empty vessel that he is, or Boris Johnson, to do anything that may, cause these divisions to be lessened, or to regulate social media in a way that allows people to maintain their freedom of speech, and to not be banned for arbitrary things in a completely opaque process. I have no faith in him to address any of those, or Keir Starmer, because they stand to benefit from the division, because it makes it potentially easier for Boris and the Conservatives to remain in power, or for Labour to get back into power. And once they're there, they're not going to address the problems that gave them power, because that would, remove their avenue through which to get there.
Yeah. I hear you, man. I've got a lot of questions here. Like I'm trying to think of the first one to pull up here. I think the first question I have is you mentioned that you think social media is exploiting pre-existing divisions and polarization, which you think we're reaching. I don't know if you explicitly said this, but we're reaching a high level, maybe not an all-time high, but we're reaching a high level. What do you think it is that led up to that to begin with? So social media really only came into the picture on a big level, let's say 10 years ago, initially about 15 years ago, but let's say 10 years ago on a larger level. So what do you think happened prior to then that fragmented, say, the UK, because we're talking about that specifically, but maybe the UK and America? What do you think led up to that increasing polarization to begin with?
So I'm a big fan of Naomi Klein, and I know a lot of people on the right aren't her biggest fan for many reasons, but I think her book, The Shock Doctrine, is an unbelievably brilliant piece of journalism. It's a fantastic examination of how like laissez-faire free market neoliberalism has driven a lot of a lot of world politics over the past 40 years, and how it's driven inequality in Britain and America to levels that are almost unimaginable. Now, I'm not sitting here suggesting that we need like equality of outcome, because that's insane. There's a level of inequality, I believe, that is acceptable, that allows people to strive for better, but also, means that there's at least not 14 million people living in poverty whilst the rich in Britain get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And I think that slow creep of neoliberalism, of globalization, and of increasing wealth and income inequality is the reason that we've ended up so polarized. That's basic. Yeah. Interesting.
So you think it's primarily economic?
I think, yeah, I'd say that's the ultimate source of it. Like, for example, there's some great studies that was done. I think the guy's name was Timo Fetzer, and he was talking about the level of austerity shock that different regions in the UK experienced. So essentially, the amount of money that was cut from like the budget of public services or welfare post 2010. So when the Conservatives came to power again. And he essentially draws a big correlation between the higher the level of austerity shock, so the more money that was cut from different regions, the more likely they were to vote for UKIP. It was nothing to do with immigration. It was nothing to do with like the levels of the levels of immigration or the number of immigrants in the area. It was all, you could draw like a pretty solid correlation between the amount of money cut from public services and the amount that people turned towards UKIP. And, you can say that then UKIP weaponized it by saying, yeah, well, it's the immigrants. They're taking all the money, or they're taking the hospital beds, or they're taking the jobs. But ultimately, it was a collapse of, it was just like pulling out the rug of the welfare state from places that like Blackpool that have been like deteriorating in terms of like how many jobs are available there. And from a town that had, lots of like factory jobs and industry jobs, and they've slowly sort of trickled away to as I call it, the slow creep of globalization. And then when you make those massive cuts to the welfare system and to like the funding of community projects and like local services, people suddenly realize that they're left with not nothing, but like that like loss that had happened slowly was suddenly felt all in one moment. I think, at least.
Okay. All right. I mean, well, it's interesting because, I mean, based on that, I mean, Brexit sounds like an obvious thing for someone in that position to vote for, right? Because it's certainly, to some degree, it's an anti-globalization idea, right? I think, to me personally, in terms of my own political ideology anyway, I mean, the most appealing thing about Brexit is simply sovereignty, right? National sovereignty. I totally am on board with that idea. And I actually think that's the strongest message of it. I think that's the thing that people don't like always miss. People talk about, always talk about the immigration or like some imagined racism or xenophobia, which I believe is like 90% imagined. But people are missing the general idea of like, no, like we are British people. We think that these decisions, whether it is about immigration or it's about jobs or, employment or certain bureaucratic procedures, these decisions should be made in Britain by the British people. These decisions should not be made in Brussels. We should be able to control all of this. We shouldn't just have to take whatever these unelected officials, who we don't even know who they are, we shouldn't have to just take it from them. So to me, as someone who's quite libertarian, well, not quite, who's very libertarian leaning, to me, that was like the easy sell. Like I didn't even vote for it because the reason I didn't vote for Leave was because the pathway wasn't clear, right? It wasn't clearly explained. Okay, if Leave actually wins, these are going to be the next steps. And I think a lot of that is because I think a lot of people didn't really think Leave could win. Even a lot of people campaigning for it. So they only kind of explained it up until a point, but they didn't really go beyond. So my personal view, the reason why I say I'm kind of like ideologically in the Leave camp, but I actually voted for Remain, was because I just kind of did the math of like, okay, well, we've been in the EU my entire life. I know what you could almost say it was a kind of conservative vote in a way, because it's kind of like, okay, well, I already know what this means. It just means things are going to carry on the way they are, right? And the Leave thing was like, oh wow, okay, well that's a big change, like that's a big shift, that's moving away from what it's been for the past several decades, but I'm not seeing a clear plan here of like, okay, what happens next? And as we know, after that happened, I mean, how many prime ministers were different prime ministers went through? Nigel Farage stepped down after making the thing happen. And the UK was just in limbo for what? 4 years. The UK is just in limbo. They're talking about, should we do a second referendum and this and that? And I was very much in the position of, for me personally, my view was I generally don't buy into doomsday narratives, and I didn't buy into the doomsday narrative of either side, right? So on the Remain side, some people were like, oh my gosh, if we leave the EU, Europe is going to cut us off. We won't be able to go on holidays. Remember they were saying that the price of
do that anyway.
the price of apples and cheese and wine is going to triple. There's going to be increased violent attacks on immigrants, and there was a lot of doomsday scenario there. And then also on the Leave campaign, they also had their doomsday narrative, which is the country's going to be flooded with, just totally uncontrolled open borders, immigration, which is going to jack up the prices of everything. The NHS is going to collapse. More people are going to lose their jobs, this and that. And
Turkey are joining the EU.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't believe either of y'all. Like, I think normally what happens, there are always doomsday narratives, always. We're living through the biggest doomsday narrative of my life right now, in fact. And I'm always kind of like, it never turns out as not even close to as scary as people imagine. I mean, Brexit has happened now. Have we even really noticed? I mean, some things.
I mean, the one thing that people are pointing to a lot actually is that like export numbers of like whiskey and cheese and stuff are way down.
Okay.
And I keep it. Oh, I almost swore there. I keep being like, I looked at that and I was like, hang on. Well, it doesn't take Sherlock to figure out that the restaurants aren't open anywhere in Europe. We can't export anything. There's no one sitting going, oh yeah, we'll take a Bushmills whiskey with that that Yorkshire cheddar. There's just not, no one's eating anything at restaurants. So how could you export anything? And I've been trying since, like, I came to the conclusion that, okay, so we've made the vote. And if you have a second vote, you're probably going to have a third vote, especially because it's not going to be conclusive. So we should probably just like
best of three,
try and get best of three.
Yeah.
But like we should try and figure out the best way to make some sort of like good thing about it. I read Roger Boodle's Making a Success of Brexit, which was a lot of I didn't really like it. I thought it was a load of tripe, because it was mainly about how it was like the free market neoliberal case for Brexit, being like, oh, we'll be global Britain and we'll get all these trade deals with like Australia and New Zealand. And I was like, why would we do that? Like, just why? And but I started to try and think, it's like, right, okay, how can we be positive here? Like, what can we do that's great? And I started to realize that this plus COVID and like the rebuild that's going to be necessary to, build back better post Brexit and post COVID is giving us this stunning opportunity to do some really cool stuff that we could not have done inside the EU. And that we should like try and grasp this opportunity and say, look, okay, you might not like that we've left Europe, but surely there's something that we can figure out. And the one I always point to is there's this great idea for like a carbon dividend that was put forward by a whole bunch of US Republicans. Actually, it's a fantastic idea, I think, anyway. And it's like a very minor, steadily increasing carbon tax that funds like a citizen's dividend for the country. And I think it's a cool way that the market could be encouraged to deal with climate change. And the idea couldn't be implemented inside the EU. And now we have this opportunity to do something cool like that. That's like thinking outside the box. It's pushing something that a lot of left wingers are understandably passionate about. And it's something that we could really benefit from, because it would, theoretically at least, put a lot of money in the pockets of everybody in the country. So it would literally, like, in theory anyway, like help like push us towards dealing with climate change whilst like redistributing a little bit of wealth. Like surely the left and the Remain camp should be like, that would be a cool idea. And every single time I post this as a suggestion anywhere, it's like, no, there can be no upsides to Brexit. It's going to be awful. It's like people are like locked into this idea that it's going to be awful. It's just going to be like riots in the street and people like roasting rats, by the side of Parliament Square. But like that's the sort of picture that gets painted, and it's up to us to make what we can of it, basically, is my kind of thought now. And it's people stuck in their echo chambers listening to how bad it's going to be to bring us back to social media,
Well, the truth is, and this is something I've known this for a while, but it really, really has hit in the past year, which is that a lot of people, a very large percentage of people, they care less about the idea than who is proposing the idea. Okay, so I tweeted this yesterday and it kind of went viral. I said, if Trump had floated the idea of vaccine passports to do like basic activities and just exist in society, 90% of the people who are suggesting it's a good idea right now would be violently opposed to it, right? They would say that it is fascistic, and I would actually agree with them on this one. They would say that it's a huge violation of human rights, which I would also agree with. And they would say that this will have a disproportionate impact on minority communities, especially Black Americans in the USA, who are the least likely demographic to want to take any given vaccine, right? So just like they argue that voter ID is racist in their terminology, they would argue that, Donald Trump's whole proposal, it's racist, it's fascistic, it's an attack on human rights, etc. But because the idea is being proposed by more people on so-called their side, they're sort of on board with it. I mean, in the USA, you see this, right? The Democrats put forward a bill and the Republicans automatically oppose. Sometimes the same bill will get put forward. The Democrats will put it forward. Republicans will oppose it. 6 months later, the Republicans put the bill forward and they all vote for it, and vice versa. So it's politics is just, sure, this is largely what we're talking about, right? It's become for so many people just a partisan team sport. So rather than thinking of, okay, what are the best ideas for society in general? And sure, we all have different ideas of that, right? It's just, okay, what benefits my side? And even the politicians are thinking this way. Does this advance our side? Does it make it more likely they'll vote for us or not? You saw this in the USA with the whole pandemic response, right? I mean, a lot of people didn't want Trump to deal with the thing well. And they didn't want to give him any credit for the things that he did do well, because they thought, well, if this thing recovers under him, there's a high chance he's going to get reelected, right? And so you had people there literally kind of in opposition to their own country and in opposition to what's good for the nation, simply because they didn't like the president, you know? And to me, that's messed up, right? Like, I'm interested in politics to a degree, but I'm also, number one, I'm like, look, ultimately your life and your success is going to come down to you. I'm very much in that camp. And also just, you know, I don't know. I don't think it's a weird one. I mean, in a time like this, yeah, politics directly impacts people's lives a lot. But I think whoever's in the White House, whoever's in 10 Downing Street, in the grand scheme of things, unless they do something like super drastic, and we are living through a drastic time because the government response has been very drastic. I'm not convinced if the Labor had won that it would be any different in this case. But yeah, I don't know. I think I don't even really know exactly where I'm going with this. I just think it becomes this sort of like distraction and this warfare. And I also think a lot of people obsess over it to their own, very much to their own detriment, right? Because if it's kind of, to me, it's like outsourcing the responsibility. So if you don't want to put in the work to make your life good and to fix your own problems, then it's easier to outsource it to the government, blame it on Trump, blame it on Brexit, blame it on Biden, blame it on Remain, blame it on whatever, rather than just going, you know what, like, my life is in my own hands. My life, my success, the health, the wealth, the security of my family, that's in my own hands. Sure, the government might be able to help. Like, I'm personally very much in the, government, leave me alone. Y'all are doing too much. I want the government doing way less than it is. Like, that's my own personal position. But I understand there's people who want it to be doing a lot more after the past year. I still don't know how they have that view. But, so I don't know.
Ask myself the same question every single day. Like, the craziest thing is that on a lot of things, right, I am really what people would consider to be quite left-wing on a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
And all that has happened this year is I find myself agreeing with the people I used to think were insane. Like the people that I used to hate every word that came from their mouth. Like Mike Graham or Julia Hartley-Brew.
Oh, they're great.
Or Sammy Wilson of the DUP, who is a young Earth Christian who denies climate change is even a vague thing. Like, the people that I used to disagree with completely and utterly, I find myself agreeing with. And like, I said this to someone the other day. I was like, they asked me who I would want as prime minister right now, and the only, like I said, Sir Charles Walker. Josh, the person who people like my friends used to like joke about being like SJW Josh, right? Would like a conservative right winger as prime minister. And I was just like, what is going on? But I think you're right about the Trump thing and the vaccine passport. I think we should petition him to call it for the US government to call it the Trump pass and get him to come out like viscerally in support of it. Yeah. And that would be the thing. But like, how do you switch off, man? Because like the last year I've been like trying to wrestle with this thing where I want to know what's going on. I'm trying to stay informed because I'm like quite scared about the prospect of future government tyranny at the minute. Yeah, which is again something I never thought I would be concerned with in my lifetime.
Happens quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It really does. It's quite scary, and it's quite scary how quickly people will acquiesce to it. But I'm trying to balance like doing that and taking up the mantle of like one of my heroes, who's Bernie Sanders, who says you should never lose your sense of outrage. And I agree with that passionately.
That's so interesting.
If you believe in something and you think you should be outraged about it, you should aim to never become apathetic about things that you believe in passionately. Essentially, is how I
get the point. I think I think that could be very detrimental to a lot of people. But
potentially,
I kind of get it.
Especially with like the thing that I mentioned in my book as well is that social media is like, we are not programmed or designed or built or evolved to deal with like all of the world's ills being like screamed at us from a phone that's there like right beside you 24/7. Like we're just not built to like take that in and deal with it well. So like how do you balance like trying to remain sane whilst remaining informed?
That's a great question, man, especially given the size of my following these days. I mean, to give you an idea, just on Twitter alone, if I turned my notifications off in 2016, but if I had them on, just Twitter alone is over 100,000 notifications a day. So it's a very good question. For me, obviously, I switch all my notifications off, and I think it helps that I don't own a TV, and I haven't for 12 years, so I don't watch I don't watch TV at all, and I don't listen to the radio, so I get my information primarily from social media and or the internet in general. But for me, honestly, it's a balance between staying informed and look, I'm very much like, I know my life is in my hands. No politician is coming to save me. No politician is coming to save you. No politician is coming to save us, right? So I understand that. We all know that the whole thing is a circus, whether you're in the UK or in the USA, it's a circus, which means it's entertaining, and it's certainly important to a degree. But the truth is, you only need to know so much, right? There's very much a point of not just diminishing returns, but negative returns, especially if you try to keep up with everything in the news. Because the truth is, the world is both a beautiful place full of wonderful people, and also it's a terrible place full of terrible people. Both of those things are true. And they've always been true all throughout humanity. Just read a history book. The best thing in the world is humans. The worst thing in the world is humans. Like, we're a really complicated species. But I think there's a balance to be reached between focusing on what you can do and what you can change and what you can affect, and then being informed of the stuff outside of that, but not obsessing over it to a degree that it keeps you, I mean, you sort of said that permanent outrage thing. I'd say that it keeps you permanently angry or upset, or so, because that can also lead to you just kind of feeling like you hate people almost, right? Mm-hmm. There are some people, I think you see this a lot online. I'm kind of like, this person is like, you know, you can reach a stage where you almost like hate people, and that can happen to anyone. If you spend a lot of time, especially on Twitter, whether you're apolitical or you're on the right or you're on the left or you're religious or you're an atheist or whatever, like there's 300 million people on there just sort of screaming their thoughts into the ether. And there's people out there, whatever you believe, there are people diametrically opposed to you. And now you have access to all their thoughts and all their ideas, and everyone's attacking each other. And it can easily be too much. So I think you kind of plug in and also consciously unplug at times, and obviously follow stuff that is primarily positive. This doesn't mean put yourself in an unnecessary echo chamber, but you don't have to engage with everything. You don't have to jump into every conversation, respond to every like. Otherwise, it's a full-time job. Otherwise, maybe it's a full-time job for lots of people, depending on the size of how many people are interacting with you. So for me, that's it. And then Sundays, I take Sundays off. I unplug so that I come back on Monday kind of like fresh and okay, cool. I can deal with this again, because I normally find come Friday, Saturday, I'm starting to be like, oh my gosh, like I'm starting to feel like I hate people again, right? and I never want that. Anytime I start to feel that, because that's really not me. Like I love people, man. I love people, and I'm very much an extrovert, which is why this whole lockdown's been hard for me. But then you've got all these compounding factors. I normally go to the gym a lot. I haven't been in the gym for 3 months now. Longest I haven't been in 17 years. So I'm aware. I'm just conscious of the fact that, okay, like I'm potentially on edge here, and people are going to annoy me quicker than usual. So let me be cognizant of that and, enjoy my real world life that I can affect, and make sure I'm happy and successful and healthy, and dip into this and out of it. Like if it's just too much, just put my phone down, switch that thing off, just go live my life, go outside, go to the park, go for a walk, talk to someone I like. So for me, those are some of the things that certainly help.
Oh, that's a beautiful message, man. Those are one of the beautiful things that humans are capable of creating.
Yeah, man. Well, we got to do it, man. I mean, ultimately, this is the thing with, cultural issues and politics and all that. One thing I do often say is, yo, we all have to live in the same world, and there's 7.5 billion of us, different ideas, ideologies, personalities, religions, belief systems, all sorts. No two people have the exact same, even if on paper you've got two people who kind of look like they kind of follow the same ideologies, like they can still be vastly different. They might not even like each other. They might not even like each other in the real world. And then you can have someone who, I'm sure you have friends who you disagree with on like a lot of big issues, but you get on really well and your personalities match and you trust each other and you like each other and you've got their back, they've got your back, all of that. But yeah, I think ultimately we have to all just learn to just accept that there's only so much we can do and there's only so much we can change. That doesn't mean that you don't try. We all try to do our bit in our own capacity. But like I said, anyway, I'm a firm believer that it's more internal than it is external. And I think if people actually focused more on making the most of their own lives and developing themselves and them being the best that they can be, rather than putting it all out there and blaming other people or looking towards the government to do everything, then actually the world would be a better place sort of by default, just by dint of that. I don't trust, I trust myself more than I trust any politician. I trust random strangers on the street more than I trust most politicians because they're not because they're not incentivized to, they don't want anything from me, right? They're not trying to win my vote or trying to do this. So they're less likely to lie. And sure, they're not in this position of power, but as we all know, look, most people in the world come off social media, interact in the real world. I know it's hard to do right now, but most people are decent. Most people are sane. Most people don't want to, it's very rare to find someone who wants to like hurt you or whose views are based in hatred or whatever it is, and that's one more thing that helps. I'll just say that one more thing, which is and this is difficult. This is hard. But I always try to remind myself that virtually everybody has good intentions. Right?
It's so important to remember, man.
Yeah. It's hard.
No one is stood, right? Like, this is something that I really try to like drum into people's head as well. You see, when people are arguing for a specific like political viewpoint or like a policy or anything, it's like they are not doing it because they think it's going to screw you. They do it because we all want the best. 95% of us want the best for the place in which we live and the people who live around us. Like we all want the best, and all we disagree about is how to get there.
Yeah, and what the government's role is in getting there.
Yeah,
well,
right? That's all we disagree over. We all want the best, and I really wish people would remember that. Like,
it is hard.
There's no one sitting in Scotland like going into the voting booth being like, "Oh, I'm gonna screw that guy in Blackpool."
No, it's a tricky one, and that's the one thing I try to remind myself of. I'm not perfect at it. It's something I have to remind myself of multiple times a day, and I wish other people would kind of do the same, because I often find like I'm kind of the bigger man in these conversations, and someone is accusing me of being this horrible, evil right winger who wants to like kill poor people or something like that. I've literally had people accuse me of that, which is like, no, like clearly that's not my right. I just have a different role. Like, my view of the government as someone who leans pretty libertarian is that the government is the source of a lot of the problems, right? So if someone is like, we need the government to do this and to do that and to do, I'm like, no, we want less government. Someone is there saying minimum wage should be $20 or £15 an hour. And I'm like, minimum wage should not exist. Right. And I'm not saying that because, so these are very opposite views, but I'm not saying this. Neither of us are saying this from a point of evil, but then that person will go, oh my gosh, that means you want poor people. I'm like, no, there's a free market, right? Minimum wage, minimum wage is a very new concept actually in terms of humanity. And it's had a lot of detrimental effects. I haven't really studied it in the UK, but in the USA, it's had a lot of detrimental effects and actually jacked up unemployment, right? So we're coming at this from different ways, but if you, it's the principle of charity, right? Assuming that trying to see the good, and also just trying to understand. This is where social media really falls down, right? We're having a great conversation here. We have the time and the space. We can, real life would be even better, but we can see each other's faces. We can respond in real time.
I got my mask, man.
If you say something that I don't understand, I can be like, hang on, like, what do you mean by that, Josh? If I say something you don't understand, you can be like, Zuby, wait, what? Can you explain that a little bit more? It's all good. But if you're trying to communicate in 140 or 280 characters at a time, and there's a big audience watching, and you can't see anyone. In fact, some people don't even have, most people have avatars. So it's not even, I'm here arguing with a dog, for goodness sake. Like, I don't.
Do you ever wonder how many of these people are real? Because like I'm really trying to figure this out at the moment. And there's a great book I'm reading by I'm gonna butcher the way you say his name. I think it's Peter Pomerantsev.
Okay.
Or Pomerantsev. Anyway, that's not relevant. It's called "This Is Not Propaganda." And the reason I bought it is because the sale sign was over the word "not," so it read "This is propaganda." So I was like, "That's hilarious! I have to buy this book." And he basically says that like we have no idea the level of sophistication of like bots and false people and things that are being created, and Eric Weinstein's talked about this as well, where he tries to engage with people that he thinks appear to be bots or shills or paid trolls or whatever, and then they'll just disappear. And he says that they tend to be pushing him in one direction, or they tend to be like saying, "Oh, I can't believe you crossed this line," and he thinks that it's something or someone attempting to like very subtly like nudge the corners of what is possible. And sometimes I'm looking at like people's comments and being like, "Are you real? Are you real?" Like I like people. I like real people. This is why I love podcasts, why I make my own, and this is why it's great to chat to you, because you have a real conversation, and like you said, it's not 280 characters or a like or a retweet or a one of those posts that's just like, "This is the way," like with the clap things, and you.
Oh goodness, what is up with us? Just repeating it. This is the way. Clap. This is the way. Clap. This is the. I'm like, repeating it doesn't make it any more. I don't know. It's strange. It's strange. Yeah. I had a question, Josh, before we, I know we've just gone a little bit over an hour, but coming back to what you were talking about before, you mentioned regulating social media. So I'm actually kind of interested in what you mean when you suggest that. What do you think? I take it, obviously, you think something should be done on a governmental level when it comes to social media. What do you think should be done?
So I think there's two things we should do here. I think the first is that, so about 30 or 40 years ago, there was this like fantastic new piece of tech that came along that allowed politicians or anyone that wanted with enough money to reach into, theoretically, the homes of every person in Britain. It was the television, right? And then we decided as a society that television political advertising was not a good idea. That the theory, as far as I understand it, was that politics belongs on the doorstep. That if you have an idea that you believe in and you're campaigning for, that your success should be based on how many people you can get to go out and knock on doors on that cold, rainy April morning, or to come to your rally and stand there for 2 hours while they wait for you. And it should be based on how many people you can personally inspire to go out and convince other people to support. I think that's pretty noble. I really like that idea. I think that's the purest form of democracy, is that without any technology involved, is simply how many people you can convince has got a good idea. And we said that politics should not be governed and should not be won sitting behind a TV camera. And in this case, we have this far more invasive, far more intelligent, far more powerful piece of tech in micro-targeted adverts that allows people to basically pump as much money as they want into pushing a certain idea with no oversight, no need to disclose who's doing it, no need to have any factual basis to what you're saying. And I think it's crazy. I think that like we made Ofcom to regulate what's going on TV. We have like advertising standards on television. We have the watershed that says what you can and can't say before and after 8 o'clock. We have like a defined set of rules that exist for how we should be able to like put forward messages. And I think we need the same thing for advertising online. And I don't think that's a crazy proposal. And the other thing I think is that we need to ensure that social media companies have a transparent appeals process for people who get banned.
Agreed.
I think they have set out their terms of service and their community guidelines, whatever you want to call it. And then they're allowed to define them as broadly as possible and then apply them as much or little as they feel. And they can even just claim that they're applying them and not apply them, or apply them in ways that just completely counter to the way they were first envisioned as. And I think that in any other type of media, this would be seen as a violation of a contract. And I think we need to define it as such in law and say that if someone gets banned based on X, Y, and Z rules that they have agreed to by signing up to this service, like Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is, and they should be able to say, hey, you said I was banned for YouTube are the worst. They just say you community guidelines strike. I mean, I've had a video removed before just for I'm not going to mention what it was, but
very little transparency.
There's no transparency. It was talking about an article that was in like a major British newspaper, and I sent them the article, and they just said nope. And I was like, well, how can you ban me for talking about something that they can talk about? And I think we need some sort of appeals process there to ensure that social media doesn't become the homogenized echo chamber that I mentioned earlier.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I don't think either of those are radical proposals either.
I think it's tricky. I think also because, I mean, all the companies you've mentioned are also American companies. So from a UK perspective, or even in any other country perspective, I'm not sure if anything can really even feasibly be done there, because we're talking about American companies that are international. In the US, maybe from the US government, they could do something about it. I know the Trump administration talked about it. They never did anything, and then lo and behold, Donald Trump, of all people, ends up getting kicked off all the platforms, which was very I think people kind of missed that thing, that they sort of missed the opportunity to make some regulation, and then the commander-in-chief sort of fell on that sword. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's sort of two parts of it. I think there's the idea of what could be done, and then I think there's how would this actually be done given the sort of nature of these platforms? It's like, okay, that would have to come from over there. The British government has no power over Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or anything.
How do TV because you can get CNN on Sky here. I can only assume that they have to adhere to certain rules based on what they broadcast here. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm saying that we need to have a serious discussion about it, because it's completely unregulated, and the politicians, much like we also talked about earlier, have no reason whatsoever to attempt to regulate this, because it's like the Wild West of political campaigning, and they can do what they want on it. The Leave campaign, and I'm not saying this because the Leave campaign won. They were just smarter in how they did it. Dominic Cummings brought in a whole bunch of physicists and data scientist experts and went, right, build me an advertising model and build me some sort of algorithm that tracks personality and tracks people's Facebook likes, assembles a picture of what their personality is based on your Facebook likes, which is 110% totally possible and very scarily accurate.
Yeah.
And then they can target ads to you. And then because technology is fantastic, it learns what ones work better. And the more data you feed it, the smarter it gets. Yeah. And that, if they were able to do that in 2016, what on earth are they capable of now? And that's such a threat to our democracy as a whole that we really need to do something about it.
Yeah, it's really complicated. I don't know. It's that's an idea I don't know about. I would very much lean towards free market solutions, and a big problem is that even those have been sort of getting blocked. I mean, I'm sure you saw what happened with the Parler website and things like that. So I'm kind of okay, well, I would lean very much towards a free market solution, but for that to be the case, the free market has to be allowed to function. If you have tech companies, which, let's be honest, I mean, they are governments in themselves at this stage, right?
Facebook,
Facebook, Google, and Amazon, from an information perspective, they're more powerful than any government on the planet, right? They have more data on each individual. They know that the targeting, everything, the algorithms, they're so sophisticated that I would sort of argue that they could be considered a form of government in themselves. If not now, then certainly in the future, when they continue to grow even further. And when we're talking Google, we're not just talking the search engine, right? Google owns YouTube. Google owns this and that. Facebook owns WhatsApp. Facebook owns Instagram. Facebook owns all. So these sort of, they're like these behemoths that are just sort of growing. And I mean, dude, literally, I don't think people understand. I think so many people dislike Trump so much that they don't truly think about the implications of multiple platforms simultaneously banning, deplatforming the president of the United States of America.
Simultaneously.
Yes, like coordinated, the most powerful man in the world, right? If they can do that to him, regardless of what you to me, I'm like, look, what you think of Trump to me doesn't matter. I'm starting to do his hand thing here. What you think of Trump, what you think of Trump doesn't matter. But the fact that that can happen to the U.S. president, I'm like, yo, everybody should be concerned. like if they can do that to him, like what chance do you have? Like if they go rogue or they don't like you or whatever, it's like, boy, yeah, I don't know. To me, that's a dangerously slippery slope there.
Yeah. And they have this, like I've heard people talk about it, like Trump derangement syndrome. But I talked to this journalist, Brian Frydenborg, about this for like an hour and a half on my podcast. And I was like, look, like I know the Capitol, like I don't want to call it an insurrection because it was a bunch of like people sort of ambling in. Like there were some people going in there that like caused trouble, but most of them were just sort of like walking around. Like they didn't seem like malicious people. Obviously there's always going to be violent people in
I
groups
think
like that,
I think riot is fair.
Riot. Okay, fair enough. Like the Capitol riot. That's a good way to put it. So, and I was like, look, I know that wasn't good. The optics are not good. Like that's not good. Like storming the government building is like, oh, that's not ideal.
Look,
like they should probably be arrested. You know,
certainly yes.
But that doesn't warrant like banning Trump from Twitter and
he didn't tell
all
them,
of these things.
He didn't tell them to do it.
Yeah, and I was like, look,
didn't tell them to do it.
Like I was like, look, right, okay, so if they ban Trump, they can do it to anyone. Like the precedent that it sets here is that you cannot say anything that these like handful of billionaires don't like, or you're gone.
Yep.
And like we can't allow that to happen. And he was like, no, man, I totally agree with you. I totally do. But Trump. And then I was like, come on, like, and that's the reaction that most people give. And to be honest, we should have seen it coming with Alex Jones. Like he was like the canary in the coal. I did,
man. Yeah. I've been on Twitter since 2009. I've seen this. I mean, people on the right, Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Loomer, and then a whole bunch of people who are lower profile. I saw them getting picked off one by one. And I was sounding the alarm bell on this years ago, but of course, because again, people are viewing this as a team sport and they're cheering when their so-called opponents get taken out. And I'm like, guys, this is not good for anybody. Like, you don't understand. Like, even if you don't like this individual, it's not good that especially if they haven't clearly violated any of the terms. If it's just one of those, we sort of just generally don't like you, so you're gone. You know, if you can point out, okay, this is very clearly this particular thing is what caused it. But the fact that people can't see that, and it's not clear, it's not transparent. And then you're also seeing a double standard, right? You're seeing people, especially people on the left, who are directly calling for violence, or who are, you know, right, like directly, you know, some of them have blue checks, right? And it's not debatable. It's like this person is literally calling for violence, and okay, that's okay. But then this person puts out something which is a little bit edgy, right? Maybe not the nicest thing, but it's not a call for violence. And they're gone. And then there's literally tweets on Twitter which are up by blue check marks where they're telling people to like do this or to do that or whatever. Or you have the whole Kathy Griffin thing where she's got like Trump's head on the, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, well, there's no, it's just double standards and triple standards. I think that's what really frustrates people, because they're just like, look, the game is rigged. The rules are not fair. It's not transparent. And then when people try to build their own thing, that gets attacked. So it's like, okay, we'll come up with the Twitter alternative, and then that gets taken down. Or we're going to try to do this, and that gets taken down. And that's where you're kind of like, okay, there's something really wrong going on here.
Do you see something popping up? Because like, there's in terms of like alternatives to Twitter and Facebook and stuff, there are things like I read, like Parler's back now, there's Gab. A lot of these places are just filled with like, you know, I think there's crazy people on both sides, but it's mostly filled with right wing nuts at the minute.
Yeah, it is.
Who don't want to be on Twitter or
who have been deplatformed. Yeah.
But like YouTube hasn't had like an obvious challenger yet, and I feel like it's. Yeah, and like, what do you see as like the major platform? Because I'm looking at like Tim Pool got demonetized in January for talking about the capital stuff. Yeah. As far that's what he says it was anyway. Like Crowder is now banned, and he's like one of the best sourced. Like he always has his sources, always. And like I don't agree with a fair amount of his positions, but he's and I don't even find him funny sometimes. He's really, really funny sometimes, and then sometimes I'm like, oh. Yeah, not but like he's really well sourced, and he's gone. Alex Jones was already gone years ago. Like Tim Pool is now going. Like they started with the crazy people, or the people who some people think are crazy, and then they've slowly like edged it towards like more and more like really, really reasonable people just being either demonetized or deplatformed. Like, what do you see as being like the most likely challenger to YouTube? Like, because I've been trying to work out where I should like look to start uploading stuff instead of YouTube.
Odyssey, I'd say Odyssey library.tv. That's my favorite one. All of my videos are on there. I know they also have ones like BitChute and Rumble, Minds.com, etc. I think Odyssey's fantastic. It only started. Library's been around for a while, but their new Odyssey platform, and I'm not saying this this isn't like me shilling or anything, but I think that platform has a lot of potential. It's really, really good, and it's well designed. I don't know how mobile friendly it is yet. I don't know if they have like a proper mobile app and all that, but the desktop version is very good, and it connects to YouTube, so you can. If you upload to YouTube, it automatically goes on there. You don't need to do the additional work. And it pays creators way better than YouTube does. Pays creators much better than YouTube does. And it's all based on blockchain, cryptocurrency, which I'm also into. So that gives it some additional protection. So I think if they play their cards right, and if YouTube continues to play their cards wrong, then the truth is, in the long term, I think all of this stuff will be sorted out. Right. Because social media companies do come and go. Like, I know we have the winners right now, but there was a time where like MySpace looked unbeatable. Right. There was a time where, so there was a time when
Bebo. Did you ever have Bebo?
Yes, I've had Bebo. Yes, I've had Bebo. Right. There was a time where, how quickly has TikTok going from being, it used to be called Musical.ly. How quickly has it gone from those days to, being massive? Remember when there was a time when Vine was really popular. Now Vine doesn't exist. So these things can happen really quickly. I mean, within 10 years, it's guaranteed there's going to be a couple of big platforms which don't currently exist, which are ultra popular. And there's probably going to be some of the ones that are currently popular, which just fall off. Is TikTok still going to be popular in 10 years? I don't know. Is Facebook? I don't know. Is Twitter? I don't know. Like, they're all susceptible because it's all a network effect, because they all get the power from the users. So the more users go on a platform, the more powerful it becomes. If loads of people start quitting YouTube, or loads of people start quitting Twitter, which they will if they're not careful, because if they keep kicking off the people who, Crowder has 5 million subscribers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Tim Pool has millions of subscribers. So if
he's close to 1 million. I was listening this morning. They're like this.
Okay.
But like Joe Rogan was the big one. That's the one I really turned around and went, maybe that's like something that like people maybe you're not realizing just how big a moment that is now. But like maybe his exodus was like the start of people like deciding to like diversify platforms or something. I just feel like it was like a big thing that people didn't really take like that much of. Some people call it like a soft retirement. But then he's gone like harder. But I find he's gone harder than ever on some stuff since he left YouTube, as he seems more like, freed in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. So. I think the truth is, at the end of the day, these are all companies. These are all public companies, so money talks at the end of the day. It's the same, same when they're doing their woke virtue signaling. They don't care about all that, right? It's just money. They're jumping on a quick bandwagon. Oh, BLM's popular right now. Hey, let's throw this up on our website. Let's like put out a statement. I'm like, these people don't care. Like, they don't care about any of it, right? Pride Month is going to be coming up in a couple months. You're suddenly going to start seeing rainbows everywhere. And I'm like, come on, guys. Like, you really think that, to me, it's so trite. It's so contrived. And I see straight through it. But, it apparently works on some people. But money talks. So when they start seeing their profits getting hit, then whether or not they like some of these people or whatever, I think they'll have to suck it up and be like, okay, maybe we don't really like Steven Crowder. Maybe we don't really like Ben Shapiro. Maybe we don't really like, but these people are bringing in millions in advertising dollars for us. So probably kicking them all off isn't a good platform, right? As Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy shoes too.
Yeah.
Right, because people were asking Michael Jordan about like his about his Jordan partnership with Nike, and he's like, hey, like, Republicans buy shoes too. Like, why would I want to alienate up to half the country when I'm trying to promote or sell a product, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. So, and I don't think most people would like to see this whole 2-tier partisan society where you have, right-wing Twitter and left-wing Twitter, and right-wing ice cream and left-wing ice cream. Right-wing t-shirt brand and left,
what would taste better?
You got leftist tears flavor over here, and here we've got like, like.
And at least try that. Would you not try it?
I don't even know, man. But yo, Josh, I'm looking at the time. We could go on for a while, but let people know where they can find you online.
So you can find my YouTube channel, The Gist. That's JIST. You can go to thegist.co.uk, or you can follow me on Twitter at Give Me The Gist. So yeah, that's where all my stuff is. Go buy my book if you thought like my talk on social media was interesting. It's Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. It's on Amazon, or for anyone who doesn't want to do Amazon, since we've been talking about horrendous tech monopolies, you can get it on bookshop.org, which is a really cool new little platform actually that's like trying to create like the Amazon for independent bookstores. So
okay.
There, and it gives like either you can buy it through a specific store that is registered, like any indie bookshop that's registered on there, or you can just buy it and then the money gets pumped into like the platform for trying to promote indie bookstore sales. So yeah, get it there.
Awesome. Josh Hamilton, thank you for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks very much, man.
Put some respect on my